Okay, so let's start having a look at the React router or router. I know there are many pronunciations for that. I try to be consistent. The idea is that if we have a complex application, of course, we will have different layouts, different views, different pages. We should be careful about using the word page, because actually in React there's only one page that we are always navigating, which is this address, okay, that can contain the whole application. So we should have an application that looks like the user is navigating through different pages, but really it always stays on the same page. We should avoid to really have different pages serving the application. What I mean is that if my browser has a link, a normal link, okay, and I click on that link or I submit a form, it will lead to a new address, of course, that will reload the whole application. And reloading an application means it will lose all the state variables that it has. So we should be very careful never to really navigate to a different page, but creating the illusion in the user that they are navigating through, or they're visiting different parts of the website. Okay? We can do that, as I mentioned, with a clever use or usage of different state variables. Okay, the state that tells the application which page is actually, with layout, should actually be displaying, but then will be totally hidden inside the application. One thing which is not working in React are the navigation buttons, the back and forward in the browser. So if the user is moving around, if it goes back, it totally exits from the application. And we see that in many websites. Okay, we do something in a website, and then we need to go back one step. Actually, if we click the back arrow, we actually are jumped outside of the website before we entered it. No, that's a defect of the website. So we should also be able to recover this navigation function of the browser. The idea is that, okay, so we need some state, because otherwise the only way to change the render is to change the state. We need some state to tell the application where we are. Are we in the page that shows the list of the questions? Are we in the page that shows the list of answers to a given question? Are we in the page for registering new users? Are we in the page for statistics, or whatever? So we need to store this information somewhere, so that the rendering process can use this information to choose which components need to be rendered. And the idea is we can store this information inside the URL. So we use the URL as an application state. We must be extra careful, okay, for doing that. We just don't use the window.location. No, window.location is the variable in the browser that already matches the URL bar, but we must be very careful, because we are in a functional, okay, word, so we cannot just use that. But the idea is just, okay, if we use the URL to encode in which part of the website I am, that is a double advantage, or triple advantage. First, I have a standard place where to store the information. Second, the user can read the URL and have an idea what it's doing. And third, changing the URL will add to the history of the navigation, and so it will enable the back and forth buttons to work. Okay? So it's a trick that different libraries use. This was an example from the Facebook website that first developed this library, saying, okay, the website is the same, the application is the same, but according to the URL, you get different views on the same, on your Facebook page, or if anybody still remembers what it was or what it is. But there are not really different pages. We load the application only once, and when we change the URL by clicking on the links, the URL changes, and the content of the page is recomputed accordingly. Some parts are the same, so the top bar and the right bar, this is a very old layout, I don't even know whether it's still like this, are still the same, and some other parts are changing, of course. So it adapts to the state given by the URL, and the state given by the URL, we call it the route, okay? In which it's displayed. So the idea is using the URL to encode the, let's call it page, even we know that really is not an HTML page, because the HTML page is only the index.js that you only load once. It's a set of components that we can display right now, and learn how to use this convention to navigate through pages, and of course to navigate without reloading the application. Remember that the reloading the application is always wrong, okay? Let's try to avoid it in any case. There's a trick here, that for this to work, what we are saying is that all these URLs actually are the same application. Okay, so there's not a React application published under slash and another React application published under slash page name. It's the same application. So actually, if a browser points here, or points there, or points there, it should always see the same application. And then inside itself, the application will query the URL and say, okay, I need to show the profile page. And this means that the server should know something about that, and whatever I'm asking to the server, it should always return index.js or index.html that calls index, that calls main, that calls up the bootstrap sequence of a React application. And in our case, in the React developer mode, it already knows that, but when you are going to publish your website somewhere, you should instruct the server, say, okay, you get many requests, but all the requests should always point to the home page. This is something that we can do when we learn to publish the application. It needs some configuration on the server. Okay, it's not just a static content that you can put there, but the server should map all the URLs to the same page, which is not the default application for. So it requires some collaboration from the server. So let's go back to the React router that actually manages the location, the URL, and helps us to decide which page to show according to the URL, without requiring us, of course, to really managing the URL as a string, because it would be a nightmare. And doing that, of course, in a protected way with the functional behavior and so on. And we should also modify the behavior of the browser when the user clicks on something, because clicking will lead to a new URL. Right now, when user click on something, we have an onClick event that changes some state variable. We should continue doing something like that. I should avoid doing an anchor link that just leads to a different URL. Maybe the different URL will load the same application, but we lose some time in reloading everything. Okay, so we should modify the way we are linking the different pages, so that actually clicking on a link will just recompute which components should be defined. So the library that we're using is called the React Router. There are other 2 or 3 routing libraries. This was the most historically the most popular one. We are now at version 7. These guys at the React Router are a very nasty habit that every year they come out with a new version and they change something. So there's some slight difference between the version 7 and version 6 that we had last year, and but there are minor differences. The major difference were between 6 and 5 that were from 2 years ago. So every year we have to adapt a bit the examples and the slides, but in this case they're simplified. We only need one library. It's called React Router. So in the previous version we had different libraries we had to load different libraries. So if you load this React Router, we install it in our project, like I already did. I created a very simple, an empty actually, React application that only contains nothing actually, and I installed into that the React Router. So this is package.json, the React Router library, so that we can play with that. Okay. How does it work? Okay, it helps us customizing navigation, and it provides a handful of components. Basically, there are some components for switching the page, so deciding what to show depending on the current URL. These are the routes components, route and routes. Okay, and they work like a switch statement in programming language. Okay, according to this, render one block or another. We don't need to write the ifs ourselves. All the matching, all the optimizations are done by the components. And then there are other components, link, navigation link, use navigate, and so on, for moving across pages. And finally, for passing values. Use params and use search parameters are for storing some value into the URL and reloading it in the next page. So there are these three functionalities. And everything requires to be inserted into a router container. So all the application, like we did before with the context provider, we have a sort of a router provider. And providing the router functionality for a portion of the website, for all the website. So the first step would be, here. For enabling the routing in a whole application, the first thing to do is to wrap all the application into a browser router component, like I did here. I think I already did. No. So this is a normal application. We are in app. Sorry, I did it in main. It's the same. In the main.js, I wrapped the whole application that can contain whatever we want into a router component. There are actually two router types defined in the React Router library, which are the browser router and the hash router. They differ in the way they are encoding the route inside the URL. Actually, the second one uses the hash sign and encodes everything after the hash sign, and this is compatible. This way is compatible with web servers that cannot be customized. So if you are publishing your website on a website where you don't have any control over the configuration, so you can play the trick that every URL always maps to index, then you must use this hash router. But otherwise, no, normally we use this browser router for all the other usages. And so it's more modern, and it's more compatible with the recent browsers. Okay, so in theory, you need any type of router component. We only have two, and we always also use the first one. So that's what we do. We use the browser router for providing the whole application, everything. So you see that in the component, we have this browser router component that creates navigation.provider, location.provider. You will see a lot with libraries that libraries tend to create these components that are called providers. It's very similar to the context providers that we had before. Okay, it's a mechanism in React for enabling a part of the application to benefit for some behavior that will be managed by upper components. So don't be no, surprised that we are seeing these providers. They are being created by the browser router itself. And then your application starts here. But it can access those functionalities that are managed by an enclosing component. Many libraries just create a lot of layers, nesting layers that complicate the look of the inspector, but actually they add their own functionality. Okay. So, what's the idea? The idea is that we define different versions of our website responding to different routes. On the right-hand side, we have 3 alternatives: a website that can show a home page, or can show an about page, or can show a dashboard. And we have a component that will show an element that will show the home, and another, and so on. So this home is a component that we want to render when we are here. And how do we select which one do we want to show? According to the URL. So we have a path matching algorithm that, okay, whenever the path matches slash, show this. Whenever the path matches about, show that, and so on. So this is the mechanism. These are routes, plural, is the container of many alternatives, and route, singular, is each of the alternatives. Inside a routes component, one and only one route, singular, is rendered. We choose one of them, the one that matches best. Matches the path, the URL. Okay? And how to generate these URLs? Through the link components. So a link component is a fake link. It's not a real link. It looks like a link. It behaves like a link. It changes the URL, but it doesn't reload the page. So actually, internally, it's changing the state of the provider that is linked to the URL displayed in the browser. So we can play with this example. Okay, let's imagine in our application we can have this. This can be the title, and then after the title, I can go back into app. Okay, I can have different alternatives. So I can have routes, and of course I need to import them. I need to import routes and route from React Router. And I could have something to show on the home page. So route path equal to slash, and then we'll see the syntax, the details of how that behaves. And the route component, should have path and element, 2 attributes. Okay. So sorry, we don't want to nest it for the moment. Path, element, what to show. The only catch here is that you see the attribute is called element, and it calls for just one element, not a tree of elements. Okay. So usually we create a separate element and we render that. We don't put JSX we could do nesting, but usually we try to have a separate element to show there. So it could be, for example, a component called home, that returns A2 home page, and another component called about, returns a paragraph with some message. So in this case, the element here would be the home component. With all the possible properties if we need to pass some properties. And then we can have another route, path about, element equal to about. Let's close it and close the route. Yep. So this is the basic mechanism. Since we have this path, and if we load the application, the home page will be displayed. If we had slash about here, then we are showing something else. But you saw on the right-hand side that the console flashed. So if we are changing the URL like this, we are reloading the whole application. So we don't want to do that. We want to switch the URL without reloading the application, and this is done through the link components. So for example, if we want to click on the title of the page, we want to be brought to the home page always. Okay. Imagine that this chow is the logo or the upper left corner of the application. So whenever I click on here, I want to be brought to the home page. In HTML, I would put a link. I would put something like href equal to slash, and then /a. This would be normal HTML, but we want to avoid it, okay? Because this works, but it works by every time I click, you see that we are reloading everything. So instead of a, we use link to instead of href, and we import the link component what's wrong here? Expected to propose JSX for the link. Okay, sorry, I forgot the /link here. Yeah. Okay, so we are on the home page. If I click here, nothing happens. Well, actually, it updates the URL to slash, but it's already slash. If I happen to be on about, okay, now the page refreshes. Okay, now I click here, it's a link component now. You see that I change the page instantly and nothing is reloading on the right-hand side. Okay, so internal navigation is done by updating the URL, updating the route with the link component. And then, according to the new route, okay, of course, in the home page, we should also have something more. For example, for being able to navigate lash, and then we have a and to okay. So we have some basic navigation from the home to about and to about to home, and we see that we are just switching components. And the nice part is that the arrows now work because they remember this sequence of changes. Okay? All of this is orthogonal to independent from state updates. Okay, we can update state variables, and of course, when we change the component, the new state will be used. So we are not always maybe going back to the same exact page, to the same exact content as before, because the state may have changed and the component is re-rendered. But at least you can move around in a more natural way. Okay, so this is the basics. Of course, to make it useful, we have a set of, let's say, rules that makes things more powerful. Okay, the basic idea of route is there's a path that is meshed, and there's a matching algorithm, which is quite sophisticated, and then it's just an element that needs to be shown. It's just a fragment. If the path is the best match, there's an idea of best match because matches can be parametric, and so it may be overlapping. Matching is not the main part of the work of the router, and it's similar to what we already learned into express routes. When we define the app.get or post, when we implement, there's also a route matching there. And here it's quite similar, or the idea is similar. We can have a set of segments that can be either a static string or a dynamic segment with a column saying, okay, this is a parameter called user ID. So it can be anything that is matched to some user ID variable, or a star, meaning anything can be matched here. So, for example, it's different to have a route with a path called slash or a path called slash asterisk, for example. So slash only matches the slash, and slash asterisk matches everything which is under that. So there are some ways of, okay, you want to, in all the subtree of docs, I want to show some common component, and then maybe I will go down and select according to what's after docs other second level choices. The fact that we have some wildcards in the path tells us that we can do route matching in a stepwise manner. So first let's see in which section of the website we are, and then we render something, maybe the main navigation elements of the page. And then we see what's after, maybe docs/tutorials or docs/reference, then we render different parts. So we have one part matching docs that creates some framework, and then some frame in the page, and another matching maybe docs or tutorials or reference that select. So we can do that in different steps. If more than one path matches, the more specific one is selected, and then of course in the documentation we have long pages to tell you which are the actual rule for deciding which is the more specific one, but it's quite intuitive in the normal cases. Okay. Routes, as I said, can be nested, because we don't want to have just one. Imagine we have one big application with one route for every component. We cannot just have everything to be decided into the app component. Okay, so app can decide something, and then some child component can decide something more. So each of them can match a part of the URL. Okay, because otherwise app should know all about the differences between maybe the form which is being loaded or not loaded or updated. It maps to different routes. We cannot put all of this information into the top level component. And so we allow routes to be nested. Being nested can be done in two ways. One is nesting the route component itself here, or having another routes instruction inside the child component. So for example, inside about, we could have another routes that will distinguish between about this and about that, for example. And that will be inside the other component. So we can mix them. What the router does is to concatenate all the choices and selects globally which components are to be rendered. So we can have a route inside another route, or different routes inside different components. And what happens when you are nesting routes is that imagine we want to have the main page, okay? The home page, then we have the main page where all our, maybe the questions are displayed, okay? So route, path equal to /main, for example. And we want to show an element that we can call for example, questions. Like that, slash. But also maybe some answers component. And maybe the question and the answer would have a similar layout. So we may have a main section that has a layout which is maybe with some navigational elements that are similar to others. And we don't want to replicate it. So what we can do is to nest some routes and say, okay, if we are in the main section, some elements will be common. And then, depending on which subsection of main we are, all the rest is displayed. But when we write something like this, we are already bound to display that component. So if we want to do nesting in a useful way, at every nesting level, I should be able to generate a part of the page, to render some components, and then let other layers in the hierarchy of nesting care about the inner components. It's difficult to explain in words, but in practice we have a special component which is called outlet that renders the children of the nested routes. Let's make an example because it's easier. We have an example here of nested routes. Route, path equal to slash, and then subpath will be about or dashboard. So what this does is to match three different paths if we concatenate the nesting. Okay, we have one possibility which is slash about, that will render layout and about, or slash dashboard, that will render layout and dashboard. But how do, for example, layout and dashboard, that are two different components, combine together? I don't want to render layout first and dashboard then. And the trick is that the layout component, which is the one on the outer side of the nesting, renders what it wants, and at a given place it renders outlet. Outlet means, I don't know what to render here, let my children decide, let my sub-routes decide. So actually, we are creating here a frame where in slash about and in slash dashboard, this div, nav, and hr will be always the same. But then if we are in about, then this outlet will be replaced by about. Or in the other case, outlet will be replaced by dashboard. So actually, the enclosing component, the enclosing route, can decide where the enclosed route will go. Inside, at the top, at the bottom, at the left, whatever. And then it's up to the outlet component, to the inner component, to render itself in a content that has already been decided by the upper component. So that's why, when nesting routes, we can render many layers of components instead of just one. Each of them, except the inner ones, each intermediate, just creates something and leaves room for the others to complete the page. And this is useful especially when we have a common layout, when we have a sidebar, which is always there, a navigation bar, a footer, which is always there, and then some content. So if these elements are really always there, we can put them in up. But if maybe some sidebar only appears in a part of the website, we can use this trick. We can decide the URLs of the pages, the routes of the application, so that, okay, all the parts that need this sidebar are below /main, for example, and all the others are outside that, so that part will be rendered only there. So it needs some planning, of course. Usually, what you should do as a first step is take a piece of paper and try to draw, okay, the different screens that application supports. Normally, it's maybe only 5 or 6 or main screens, okay? And see what they have in common and how we can match some routes to those so that we minimize the repetition and we maximize the overlap. So it's a design issue. And then there are some special routes that cover common cases. I said before that inside the routes switch, one and only one route is rendered, and the one that matches best. But what happens if none of them matches? Okay, if no route matches, well, let's see. We have slash main and about. No, sorry, main, we don't have the question component, so let me comment it. Home and about. And if I write route something else, I have just a warning here. There's no route matching else. And of course, no component is rendered. Okay? But not of course. It shouldn't happen. We should try to avoid that. Okay? And so there's a default case, which is called index. Index matches only if no other routes match. So it's the default case, basically. For, I know, so the default page where everything will be mapped, or it can be an error page if nothing matches, and so on. Okay? It matches as a parent route when none of the children match. It's also useful in nesting routes. Okay? I have many small routes, and they have a default case when none of them match. There, yeah?
You create multiple index, one nesting.
One per layer. One index per for each layer of nesting. Yeah. Then we have a layout route, so-called layout route, which is really not a route, because it always matches. And there's no path specified. You always want to render it. Actually, it could also be put outside of the route component, but in nesting you cannot maybe put everything outside. And there's this asterisk that will match everything else if we want to show an error message and so on. And we have an example here that shows the combination of this, which are quite a regular combination of these elements. Okay, so for example, okay, we have a first page, and we are deciding what to do under slash. We have a common layout here that creates a navigation bar and then outlet. So the outlet will render the result of the nested routes. And about dashboard, what we had, and then we have an index, home. So what it means is that for showing the home page, we don't need to specify a path like slash home, but it's just slash is applied. Index means that this element takes over the role of the father. There's no closer matching to it, and so we will match actually the URL of the father. Without this, the slash would only render the layout with an empty outlet. So we are filling the outlet in case no other match is better. So slash, it will be filled with the URL slash will be filled by the index route. Then if we have slash about, we go here, we have slash dashboard, we go there, and if we have anything else, we generate an error page. Okay. This set of routes now are in the same component, but they could also be inside children components. Okay. In that case, we render one child, and then inside there will be another routes that will switch about the single routes. If possible, in many cases, we try to have all the routes at the top level so that we can see all of them together, but it's not always the case. In a very complex website, maybe we have many top-level components, the home for the logged-in user, the home for the anonymous user, that may have different type of layout. If you have a game, during the game you have a different layout from all the parts where you're starting the game, seeing the statistics, and so on. So there are some entry points that may have strongly different layouts, and then inside each of them we have different routes. It always starts from the design of the application. For moving from page to page, like I mentioned, we had the link element for creating an hyperlink, or if we want to move from page to page doing some action, so inside some callback or for some reason, we can do that with a hook which is called user navigate. This just say never use a link, never use a form. The navigate hook, the use navigate is a strange hook because it always returns the same object called navigate, which is a function. And you can call this function by providing the URL of the page where you want to jump to. So it's like clicking on a link by yourself. But you can do that in event handlers or next week we'll see use effect handlers and so on. Whenever the website needs to move to a different page because I inserted the new element, then go back to the home page. For going back to the home page or to go into a different section, after we do some operation, you just call navigate. Okay, with the use navigate hook. It's strange because it's not just a function that we can import. We should import the hook that will create the function for us. Okay. Okay, that's the basic idea. There are some details. For example, if you have a set of links, when you want to navigate through different sections, so the classical menu with different voices, and the voice where you are in is highlighted in some way, so tabbed navigation and so on. There's this not a normal link, but the navigation link that will change its style according whether you are in the same sections or not, but these are details. And then we have dynamic routes. So in our example, for example, that we will try to build, we may have, let me try to think by writing something. So we can imagine our question and answer application with different pages. And these different pages could be, for example, something like a home page for welcome. What does it show? Does the home page already show the list of questions, the latest ones? Does it show my profile information? I don't know, we can decide, okay? So, the home page will show maybe some info related to the user. If logged in. Otherwise, if the user is not logged in, we need to show some general information, maybe login or whatever, okay? For now, we don't have the login mechanism, so we are already assuming that the user is already logged in, but sooner or later we'll change it. Then we can have a page for questions, a page for the list of questions that can be sorted, can be filtered, can be searched, can be added, and so on. No? And we can jump to the list of answers to a given question. So imagine in terms of routes, this could be something like questions, okay? And this could be just a home route slash. But in the case of list of answers, we could have a different page called answers, maybe. But we need to know which question we are referring to. So the page will be the same, but we need to pass some number to that, some ID of the question. And this can be done with this by defining a dynamic route. So every route of the type answer slash question ID will render the list of answers. They will be the same page, but referring to different questions. Okay, right now in our toy game, we only had one question, so we didn't need to navigate anywhere. Okay, but now we are starting to think about that. And so we can modify, and so we can act, so modify on the questions for this answer, or the answers for the question. Okay, so that's why we need, for customizing part of the website, we should also pass some arguments, which are not passed by properties. Because a prop is passed by the father component. So app will pass the ID to the answers page by saying, but then app will contain in a state the information about the question ID, for example. Okay? Here, we move this information up to the page. And this enables us to play some different games. For example, opening different tabs on the same website and seeing in parallel different IDs. Because the URL is just mapping, it already contains this information. Okay? Navigating back and forth between answers and questions, so by changing the ID and so on. Okay? So this is an easy way of passing an argument without storing into a context or into a state or so on. Some information should be part of the route, some information should be part of the context. For example, I said here, if logged in, I'm not proposing, for example, to put here some something like home slash logged user. The information about the logged in user could be also provided like this. I would never do that because this is totally unprotected. Every user can manipulate the URL and write something like that. So I can put your user ID and see and modify your questions. Okay, in this case, the user ID is something that should never be exposed to the user or modified. It's something that should be into a state variable inside app and distributed to the component in a context, but not like this. Okay, so for example, this is not it's global information that is useful, but should not be mangled by changing the routes or by changing the links. And the list of questions, the list of answers, of course, they will share some part of the layout, and then there will be, and maybe one of them, from the list of questions, we can go to the specific details of the answer. This in our case. So how do these parametric routes work? Well, quite easily, because you just have the semicolon here, the column here to specify the matching. Post slash ID, and the ID can be any sequence, any substring. And the value of this part of the URL will be available through a use params hook in the child component. Okay, so this value is not visible inside the component that contains route, but is only visible inside the element that it will be called. And it can be recovered by use params. Use params will collect all the parametric routes, so you could have a route with many parameters inside. Use param will give you all of them, not just the last one. And so you extract the one that you need by taking a given property of the object, for example. Use param always returns an object with one or more properties. And we just extract the properties that you need. Sorry. Okay, this was just an example of how to call an element with a parametric route and how to extract this information in the children. So, for example, in our case, let's just try to imagine some simple navigation. Okay, we can have the elements home, where we see let's say go to the list of questions, for example, and we make it a link, or okay, we make it a button. So let's see how to navigate by programmable. So a button, go, something like that. So in my home component, there's something wrong. Home, is it running? A button, sorry, I have to import button. From React Bootstrap. Okay. So let's say I have a page with a list of questions, and I enter that page with this button. It's not very nice as a behavior, but just to foresee the different types of links and different types of navigation methods. And this page, questions, I still don't have. Let's do something very, very brutal. Can return just a list, or return a title. And then a list of items. Okay. And so, how to activate these questions with a route called this question, for example. So, let's remove the comment. And we go to we want to navigate to this list on the push of a button. So we need to associate to the link of the click of this button the change of the route. It's not just a link. And so we can on-click. We can have a method like okay, go to questions. And go to question is just a handler that we define here. Which navigates, it's just one line, navigate to /questions with a lowercase n. And navigate is a function that we get through the hook. navigate is use navigate from React Router, this one. Okay, so on click we call this handler that calls navigate to the URL that we want. So one way of navigating, like we said, is clicking on link, and the other one is calling navigate to a given URL. Then what happens is that URL is changed, and the component is re-rendered, and the routes will now select this question component. This question will link to the different questions, and to link with the answers to the different questions. So in this case, I would have, for example, a link to answers, and the idea of the answers, let's make it 1. And it's a link here. This one, they could be links, there could be on-click actions, like we know how to handle both, okay? The important thing is that we decided the URL of the destination. Answers 2, and so on. Answers 3, link. What did I write? Yeah. And of course, now I had to have, okay, now I have the list. They go to answers, but right now I didn't mount any components under answers. Let me define the route also, which will be route path answer as missing slash question ID element answers. Okay, and now we can have a component function answers that first of all recovers the information it needs, const question ID extracted from the parameters React Router, and then renders something like I am question, the answer, answers to question number question ID. So how does it work? Okay, list of questions, we go there. Question 2, answer to question number 2. If I go back, I then go to question number 1, I see question number 1, and so on. Okay, and so I move like that. Of course, this will be all generated by the data. Right now, I just put some fake page. If the questions and the answers should have a common layout, then I could put them into an intermediate route that renders something and then uses the outlet. We can see that if we want. So maybe we want to have something common. So at least the question and answers we could put there. We could put there into some common layout. Okay, and maybe also this 3 or 4. Okay, let's take the example of having an index route. So instead of having a specific path for slash, we can have the slash and then the index, and so this element will be in the index route so that we can modify it. We can just play. There are many ways of doing the same thing. If we want to have a common layout for these two, we should also have a common prefix. Okay, we should also have a common prefix because otherwise we cannot nest them under. So we should have something like route, path maybe main, and then we have main/questions. Something like that. If we do that nesting, then the question will be under /main/questions, and the answer will be under /main/answers. Okay, that's one more reason for defining the path at the beginning, because once you define them, and if you want to change them, you will need to change them all over your application. Because when you start creating links and navigations, and in this case, you can have an element which is called main, for example. And for example, the function main let's see how it works now. Nested under main, oh sorry, I should remove the, for nested routes, of course, they cannot start from a slash, but they just add it to the previous one. Okay, so if I go to main here, I have this big main, but it's not rendering anything. So also main questions is not rendering yet, because I don't have the outlet, say. So what I should do is to navigate, change the navigation by making this extra step. About is out, all the answers should be under main. And the main component itself should not just render something by itself, but it should also be able to include whatever is nested inside that. Okay, so this means that the home page is here. So the home page has its own layout. If we go to the list of questions, we enter the main section of the website, main/something. And this part here, main, that we can have menus, navigation bar, whatever, remains constant even if you move through the different questions and answers. And you see that from the URL, we are building the different parts of the page. Okay? This leaves out, so it's quite an easy mechanism. We should have a clear ideas of how we want the pages to look like, and how we want to map the different pages or the different sections of the pages to URLs that can be nested, and which ones are static, which ones are parametric, and so on. We will do this work on our real application, or we'll make it grow with these ideas on next week. Will be actually in 2 weeks, like I mentioned. But we should never forget about another aspect, which are data. Okay, information. Where is data coming from? That will be another question. So if the state, where is the state about the question and the answers? If it's all, how does the routing affect that? Well, it doesn't, probably. We can have some states here. Okay, sorry, questions, set questions, like we had before in app. and we can pass this state to the component that needs it. For example, inside question, of course, we should need to pass set questions and so on. Answers also will need information about the current question and about all the answers to that specific question and so on. So in the routing, okay, the nesting of the routing is able to provide some information about the layout that we need and some basic minor information like the answer ID. Then the information about the real data, the application state, should be either given by the parent, like normal props. Okay, the nesting relates to the URLs. The props needs to be passed explicitly, or it could be loaded or known by the component itself. Once I'm starting to think about a website like this, the list of all the questions may be a long list, but the list of all the answers to all the possible questions may be too much to compute at the beginning. So this also calls us for the next steps when we delegate maybe some child component of answers to load its own data from the server. Right now we don't have it yet. Okay, so the idea is that we worked by pulling the state up to the top level, at least for the state which is not so huge to load. But then when we think about a larger application, maybe we don't need to have all the information at the beginning in the top level component, because all the information could be too much probably. And so we should also think whether the list of questions, of answers, for example, is needed in anywhere else in our application except this route. If it is, we just load it there and don't load it in the upper components. Okay, so the idea of state lifting is okay when you have to share the state between different components that are on different branches. But if you don't need, but it brings the burden that the component, top level component, should know everything that could be needed by the child components. If it's not the case, so if some child component only needs some information, or we never show the answers of question number 1 at the same time as the answers at the question number 2, there's no point of loading both of them into memory. Remember that the memory is the browser memory. Okay, and so we will play with also we will reason about which information can be delegated to the child components and which should be known at the top level and then passed down. Okay, and it's a topic of integration of the client with the server. But in any case, if we want, in our current implementation, we need to make the data structure a bit more complex. For example, having more than one question, or answers to different questions. And even by maintaining the same structure, we need to add new methods and then do this kind of transformation to our application to have actually at least 3 different pages: the home page, the list of questions, and the list of answers. Then in the list of answers, that's what we already have, okay, for managing. So it will take a bit of time to rethink in this way. And as I mentioned, the first step, and also for your lab, that will be okay the week after, start thinking. My suggestion is start drafting the pages that you want to see in your application. Okay, so that it will be help in designing the forms and designing also the routes. Okay, so this basically is the last topic about the behavior of the application. After this, so the next week we'll complete the exercise about that, and then we'll start thinking about the integration with the server. So we're trying to put everything together. Okay. So I think that for today that's all. If you want to play and try to play with routes with different ways, There are in the React Router documentation, there are several examples that help us to see how these different parts combine together. In the meantime, have a nice vacation for Easter, and we see back on the 29th of April. Okay? Thank you.